We came here to mine. We came here to survive. But when they rose from the ground to erase us, we showed them what it means to be human. This is the untold story of Galran 6, a human colony that was never meant to be remembered, but refused to be forgotten. Galran 6 wasn't paradise, but for the 200 colonists who lived beneath its titanium alloy dome, it was home. A scarred, dry planet with twin suns and dusty crimson soil. But deep under that lifeless ground lay veins of nerexium, an energy-rich mineral powerful enough to run fusion cities for decades. The Earth Federation didn't see Galran 6 as a sanctuary. It saw a gold mine. But to Elias Rourke, it was both. Once a decorated soldier in the Martian Reclamation War, Elias had traded bullets for drill rigs and bloodshed for silence. He now worked as a systems engineer, monitoring extraction drones and keeping reactor coolant lines stable. The war had taken too much from him: friends, faith, and purpose. Here he'd found some of it back. His daughter, Tilda, was 12. She loved painting the alien skyline and baking tasteless protein cakes. She believed in a world better than Earth, and Elias believed in her. The colony's days were slow but steady. Automated harvesters worked 20-hour shifts. Human miners oversaw the heavy lifting. Every night, the mess hall filled with laughter, old stories, and the synthetic smell of machine oil and powdered soup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. And peace is always temporary. It started with a silence, not just any silence, an engineered one. At 0314 Standard Time, the colony's primary comm relay cut off. No static, no malfunction warning, just dead space. Elias was already awake, sipping black rehydrated coffee in the monitoring room. He tapped the panel. No response. No uplink to orbit. No handshake from mining bots in Sector 5. His instincts began to itch, the kind of itch he hadn't felt since Titan. He reached for the local scanner grid. All drones offline, defense turrets in standby, power levels spiked for no reason. Then the tremor came, subtle but real. A vibration through the metal floors like a heartbeat beneath the crust. He bolted out of his quarters. The explosion was so violent it rocked the entire eastern dome. Alarms wailed, emergency lights stuttered to life. A fountain of fire erupted from Sector 5, where the largest nerexium deposit had just hit maximum extraction capacity. Flames painted the night sky orange. Workers scrambled, half-dressed, pulling their families out of HAB units. Screams echoed across the dome. Then, just as the smoke began to settle, they emerged. Crawling shapes, tall, blade-limbed creatures with segmented armor, jet-black carapaces, and glowing red eyes. They didn't come from orbit. They came from beneath. No one knew what they were, not at first. Not until later, when the few surviving xenologists in orbit reviewed the black box data and named them. Varn'ek. Not an invading force, not a scouting party. A reawakening species, indigenous to Galran 6, driven deep underground by ancient cataclysms, until mining drills woke them. With each movement, they screeched, an unnatural sound like metal grinding on bone. They sliced through miners with bone blades fused to their arms. Acid dripped from their jaws, burning through steel. Turrets didn't fire. Why? Because the colony's defense grid was calibrated for mechanical threats, not organic life forms. Elias ran. He grabbed Tilda mid-sprint, slung a supply pack over his shoulder, and headed for the emergency bunker. Along the way, he found Jana Voss, the colony's chief medic, carrying 2 injured technicians. Behind her was Derek Vall, Elias's old war buddy. 1 mechanical arm, half a face scarred from orbital shrapnel. They slammed the reinforced door behind them just as the shriek of the Varn'ek echoed down the corridor. 27 people made it to the underground safe house. That was all, out of 200. The underground level had been unused for years. It was built during the initial setup phase, before they believed the surface was safe. It smelled like rust and old air. Elias patched into the surveillance feed, what little was left. Most of the dome was burning. Power relays were being cut. Life support systems sabotaged. He knew what that meant. The Varn'ek were intelligent, and they wanted extinction, not war. In the dim light of the control room, Jana cleaned the wounds of a crying child. Derek cursed under his breath, pacing. Tilda sat silently beside her father, gripping a small data pad, trembling but saying nothing. Elias watched the screen. He watched his world collapse. Then he stood, and without raising his voice, he said, "This isn't a mining accident. It's a massacre, and it's not over yet." For hours, no one spoke. The survivors huddled together in the bunker's low-lit chamber, listening to the muffled rumble above, the groaning of metal structures collapsing, the soft thuds of something moving overhead. Elias sat in front of a dusty console, working his way through corrupted files, trying to access the geological logs from the last few weeks. What he found changed everything. A hidden folder, automatically generated by the Deep Core Drill's AI, contained seismic maps and biological scans. Scans the system had flagged, logged, and ignored. According to the data, the miners had struck more than Nyrexium. They'd pierced a series of underground hives, complex and ancient. The ore veins they were extracting weren't just natural deposits. They were the lifeblood of the ecosystem beneath Galran 6's surface. They weren't harvesting energy. They were killing a world. Elias leaned back, numb. He hadn't fired a weapon in years, hadn't given a single order since his commission was retired. But now he had blood on his hands again. "I say we find a ship and get off this damn rock," Derek growled, pacing furiously, mechanical hand clicking with each frustrated step. "We grab what we can, fight our way to the hangar, and leave the rest." "What people? Most of them are already dead." Elias watched them both from the corner of the room, the weight of the data chip in his pocket like a stone. "It's not just about saving us," he said quietly. The room fell silent. He stood slowly, holding up a flickering holomap. It showed the destroyed sectors and the paths the Varn'ek were taking. Strategic, patterned, efficient. "They're not savages," Elias said. "They're intelligent, tactical, and if I'm right, they're not just attacking, they're cleansing." He turned to Jana and Derek, eyes heavy. "We didn't just drill into their home, we poisoned their future. They're not at war with us, they're erasing a threat." "And what do you suggest?" Derek snapped. "We apologize?" "No," Elias said. "We fight." They couldn't fight like soldiers. They didn't have weapons, artillery, or an army. But they had drills. They had diggers. They had bots. And they had fury. Within hours, the survivors turned the bunker into a forge. Miners reprogrammed their exosuits to withstand claw strikes. Engineers turned plasma welders into handheld flamethrowers. The digger bots were given rudimentary targeting code and armored with scavenged plating. Tilda helped where she could, passing tools, sorting wiring. Elias wanted to keep her hidden, but she insisted. "I'm not scared," she whispered. "I want to help." Jana placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "She's stronger than she looks." "So was her mother," he said softly. Elias chose the time carefully, when the seismic sensors showed the Varn'ek moving east toward the ore fields. He led 5 others through the old maintenance tunnels, surfacing near a storage depot. The air above was thick with smoke. The dome was half collapsed, twisted steel and ash. But the depot had supplies and explosives. They moved quickly, silently, but not silently enough. A Varn'ek scout spotted them, its blade arms gleaming in the darkness. Elias didn't hesitate. He activated a makeshift grenade, lured it into a collapsed corridor, and detonated the roof on top of it. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. They returned with crates of charges and a new sense of belief. That night, back in the bunker, the survivors gathered in the old mess hall, now blackened and lit only by backup power. Elias stood before them, dust and grease on his face, his voice calm but fierce. "We were never meant to fight there. We came here to dig, to build, to live in peace." He looked around the room, at mothers holding children, at mechanics gripping makeshift weapons, at faces filled with exhaustion and rage. "But peace is a privilege we no longer have. They've taken our friends, our homes, our sky." He paused. "They see us as invaders. Maybe they're right. But now we fight. Not for conquest, not for revenge. We fight because we must. We fight for survival. There was no applause, just silence. Then someone stood, then another, and another. More than before. More organized, no longer just hunting, now they were clearing. They poured out from the crater in waves, limbs clicking in unison, screeching like metal tearing through bone. The colony dome, now fractured and blackened by fire, barely stood under the weight of their movement. But this time, the humans were ready. The defense grid was still down, but the traps weren't. Modified digger bots emerged from trenches, spraying plasma across the terrain. Explosive charges rigged to motion sensors ignited, collapsing entire corridors into fiery tombs. Plasma welders turned into cannons as miners held their ground. Elias stood at the front, clad in a patched exosuit reinforced with scrap metal and ceramic armor. Derek covered the left flank, his mechanical arm glowing blue, charged with an experimental energy coil they barely managed to stabilize. Jana stayed at the rear, overseeing wounded and rerouting power where needed. The Varn'ek charged and humans, once miners, pushed back. The war for Galran 6 had begun. Despite their preparation, the Varn'ek were relentless. They adapted quickly. What worked once failed the second time. Their outer shells hardened. Their movements changed. After 40 minutes of brutal fighting, they breached the lower tunnels. Explosions thundered through the underground level as Derek's squad was ambushed. Fall back to reactor sector!" Elias roared into the comms. Elias rushed to cover their retreat, launching a seismic charge that collapsed the tunnel behind them, but he was hit. A slash across the torso, deep, burning. Blood soaked his suit. Jana dragged him to safety, hands shaking, refusing to let go. "You're not dying, not today," she hissed, patching the wound. He smiled weakly. "Not yet." Back in the control room, the remaining survivors regrouped. They had one shot left, the reactor core. If detonated in a controlled overload, it would wipe out the central crater and all Varn'ek hive tunnels. The blast would level half the colony, but it could end the invasion. Problem was, the detonation had to be manual. Remote activation was disabled. No relay system. No backup AI. Someone had to go in. No one spoke. Then Elias stood. "I'll do it." Jana's eyes welled up. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Elias said. "We knew the moment we stayed that this might end with sacrifice. I've made peace with it." Derek clenched his fist. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Elias looked at him, smiled faintly. "I'm not alone. I've got all of you until the very last second." He turned to Tilda, who stood frozen in the doorway, tears in her eyes but trying not to cry. He knelt beside her. "I love you. Be strong. Be better than me." She whispered, "I already am." They hugged. The reactor chamber loomed ahead, massive, glowing, pulsing with barely restrained energy. Behind him, the Varn'ek pursued. They knew. They could feel the danger. They surged after him. He reached the console, bleeding, gasping, half-broken, but his hands moved steadily. He set the overload sequence. 5 minutes. He turned to face the corridor. He didn't run. He waited. And when the Varn'ek appeared, dozens of them, he stared them down and smiled. "Come get it." From the colony's edge, the survivors watched as a blue-white explosion rose into the sky like a new sun. The ground shook. The air turned electric. The crater collapsed into itself, a wave of heat sweeping through the plains. Then silence. For the first time since the attacks began, true silence. Not fear, not death. Peace. They had won. The colony was gone. Galran 6's once shimmering dome now lay shattered, its steel skeleton twisted like old wire. Ash floated through the air, carried by soft winds that hadn't stirred since the skies first burned. But beneath the destruction, there was life. The remaining 38 survivors, bruised and broken, emerged slowly from their underground shelter. They stepped into a cratered world, into the aftermath of war. Tilda clutched a small pendant, Elias's service tag. She said nothing, her eyes hardened beyond her years. Jana stood beside her, blood still staining her coat, but her shoulders straight. Derek limped out behind them, carrying a salvaged radio. Static crackled through it. Then, a signal. Faint, but human. Orbiting Federation vessel EFS Thunderline, returning to check Nyrexium yields, had picked up the overload signature. Unknown detonation detected. Is anyone alive? Jana replied, her voice calm, clear, and full of quiet fire. Galrin 6 stands. Humanity doesn't break. 3 days later, after emergency supplies were dropped from orbit, the survivors began rebuilding, not just shelters, records. Tilda, working beside Jana and Derek, created a digital log, a memory file, one that wouldn't just describe the attack, but what it meant. She called it the Miners' War. Her first entry was short. My father was not a general, not a politician, not a hero in the traditional sense. He was a man who wanted peace, who came to this dead world to build a life. But when death came to take it away, he stood up, and he fought back. We didn't win because we were strong. We won because he refused to surrender. His name was Elias Rourke. He was just a miner, but he gave us a future. Months passed. The Federation launched a full investigation. The Varn'ek tunnels were sealed permanently. Galrin 6 was declared a restricted war memorial zone. But word spread. Across the systems, in mining ships, on colony broadcasts, on black market channels and war forums, the story of Galrin 6 was told. Not as propaganda, but as truth. But when you push them to the edge, they become something terrifying. Not conquerors, not monsters, survivors. On the anniversary of the attack, a small memorial was built at the edge of the main crater. A metal plaque stood atop a carved Nyrexium stone. The engraving was simple. He was just a miner, but he gave us a future. Tilda stood there at dawn, now 16, her face calm as the twin suns rose over the horizon. Beside her, Jana placed a hand on her shoulder. He'd be proud of you. Tilda smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I know. And the wind blew softly, warm and quiet like a promise. The colony may have burned. The world may have crumbled. But what they left behind wasn't ashes. It was proof that humanity doesn't bow. It rises. He was just a miner, but he gave us a future. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. We bring you powerful human versus alien tales, one story at a time. Like, comment your favorite moment, and don't forget to hit the bell icon for the next HFY story drop. Humanity is just getting started.